Welcome back to Functional Cyberholic. I'm Dan Parelskin, and I am going to take on Zero Trust. Why do I want to do this as my very first video? I've spent the last 4 years on this topic, and I think after talking to thousands of people about this topic, that it's a great place to start. And so what I'm going to start with is just, what is it? What does it mean? And I've seen a ton of content. I've spent a lot of time learning about Zero Trust from probably some of you all, as well as from some of the experts. One of my favorites is Paul Simmonds, if you haven't checked him out. There's a great recording from RSA 2019, The Fallacy of the Zero Trust Network. And I thought that was a really great title for his video because it's kind of ironic to call a network a Zero Trust network because the whole point of the network is to network, and Zero Trust is kind of the opposite of that. So let's talk about, what does it mean? What is my definition? Again, I've heard a ton of definitions. I've asked everything from customers to sales reps to CISOs to CIOs to founders. What do they call it? And everyone has a different answer. So I thought this was probably the simplest graphic I could find on the topic, and that makes it a great place to start because complexity is the enemy of security. And if we don't keep these things really simple, bad things happen. So Zero Trust security, what does it mean? Most people will tell you, never trust, always verify. And I think that's a great general definition, but it's very abstract. Never trust, always verify. What does that mean? It really makes Zero Trust a little too much about identity and authentication, which is really important. It's absolutely the cornerstone of Zero Trust. But I think a better definition is that you treat the intranet or the network like the internet. So think about that for a second. You treat the intranet like the internet. What does that mean? That means that traditionally, if I'm on the network, I'm in the office, here are the people, look at that phenomenal graphic, and I need to get on this network, I need to get to these devices, maybe these workloads, that looks like a database graphic, who knows, or this data that I can just get to it because I'm on the network. Now, the server itself may have a password, or even a firewall in front of it. There are many different ways that you can try and mitigate risks in networks, but the whole point of Zero Trust is, starting in like 2003, the industry started to realize that finding bad stuff and using firewalls was not good enough to just imagine that we're secure. The adversary became very good starting about 20 years ago at figuring out the way onto the network and how to do things with it. In fact, it goes back much further. If you haven't read the book, The Cuckoo's Nest, absolutely check that out. I think it's a phenomenal read. It's one of the only books that I really recommend in cyber, although there are a lot of good ones. I love that one as a starting point. So one of the only books I recommend, I should say, to beginners about cybersecurity, because it really gives you a story to attach to, and that's a great way to learn. So what does this mean? Okay, we're on the network, we can get access to stuff. Now, as an industry, we've been selling billions of dollars worth of detection tools and prevention tools that try and say, okay, you look like you're behaving badly, so I'm going to stop you. Or you have a signature, which is a match. Just think of a signature as being a match. Like, I'm looking at a photo, you look like this photo, you're bad. That's really all you need to think about from a signature perspective. Let's keep the technical parts out of it. And what is it that makes me think you're bad? Or am I wrong about that? In which case I could block you. It's called a false positive. Very annoying. So if we treat the intranet like it's the internet, how is that different? Well, if I go to a website right now, say this Loom website that I'm making this video on, and I go to log into it, it's not going to just give me access because I say I am who I am. It's going to ask me for my credentials, just like your bank does, just like your insurance company website does, just like your business websites do, right? But if you're on the network, in the servers there, and it sees you're coming from the network, traditionally a lot of tools or a lot of authentication services would just let you go to that resource. And so what Zero Trust really does is it tries to find a way of enabling the business still like a network does without disabling the business like a cyber breach might. Right? Whether it's violating compliance or whether it is losing data or hurting your reputation, there are a ton of reasons that businesses do not want to just let any bad actor or even just careless actor that's maybe working for the company get into the network and start making mistakes. Major bad things have happened over the last 20 plus years. You've seen many of them in the news, but imagine that this user gets on here and their device is infected. Now it's spreading throughout the network. So it's getting lateral movement is what we call that throughout the network, and it's infecting things. That's bad. Now, it could also be that this user is actually a bad actor. Their credentials have been, the good user credentials have been stolen, and they're now being used to infiltrate and exfiltrate data, infiltrate the network and exfiltrate data out of the network back to some sort of command and control server where that bad actor is going to store that data, or maybe they'll even encrypt that data with something like ransomware and then charge money for that. There are all sorts of ways that bad actors will leverage the vulnerability of just having a network. So what are some of the reasons that this happens? Well, the networks are protected, but they're usually protected with 3 or 4 major common themes. So one of them is, how do you get access to it in the first place? Well, if you're remote, you're going to probably need a VPN to get into that. And VPN concentrators are notoriously vulnerable and oftentimes exploited so that a remote user can just take advantage of a vulnerability and get remote execution inside your network, and that's very bad. The next one would be maybe they are using what's called a zero-day attack. So they have either learned a vulnerability that's inside your network or on one of your devices that's maybe talking to the internet. They are maybe finding privileges that give access to some of your core assets in the business. So they're going to exploit that. Whatever it is, if you're not really tightly enforcing that user proves who they are with some sort of multi-factor authentication at that access point to the network, but also continuously once they're in the network, very likely that they're going to be able to get past your firewalls, your intrusion prevention systems, exploit your inbound gateways on your VPN concentrator or your VDI gateway. There are so many ways that these networks end up manifesting themselves in an insecure way to bad actors trying to take advantage of that, or even again, someone unknowingly making a mistake and the network being exploited. So Zero Trust really flips that upside down, and it says, we don't necessarily want to put everything on the internet day one. We're going to still try and leverage those firewalls in I think a reasonable most environments. Now, there are some companies that went all in and really did put all of their apps on the internet and everything's behind MFA perfectly. But, then that's got its own challenges. So I wouldn't recommend that day one. So we're going to still use, a 99% type mitigation tool to stop users from getting in the network. But once they're in there, I'm not going to just trust them because they're on the network. If I want to get to this server, I need to prove who I am. If I need to get to these devices, I'm going to prove who I am. If I'm going to get to these workloads, I'm going to prove who I am. And we're going to watch what they do throughout those sessions. We're going to audit everything that the users do in order to make sure that we trust that activity to continue. And if they did do something bad, at the very least, we can figure out what it was, do root cause analysis, and triage and respond to that incident as fast as possible with as much telemetry about that event as possible so that we're educated on what the user did or the bad actor did, and then we can fix it and remediate it as fast as possible. So the Zero Trust network is really about moving away from trusting users on the network and treating it more like it's the internet. Even if you are still using firewalls, that's fine, but we're going to discreetly request authorization, post-authentication of the network to every discrete asset, workload, server, and so on inside the network. And really, networks become a place for servers and users. We want to kind of have them off the network. Now, we may give them access to components inside the network through the rules that give them access here, but that's the concept of Zero Trust, is authentication, authorization, and really trying to ensure that if they do get into something, we know exactly what they did and why they were allowed to do it and so on. So that's my first video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe. I have a lot more great content coming out around these topics. And if you totally disagree with me and you have a completely better definition of Zero Trust, I'm actually very interested in that. So please do share that. That'd be great to know, because I'm always trying to get better at this stuff, and I hope you feel the same way. Thanks, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Take care.